right, thank you very much. What a pleasure it is to be here this morning, sharing this event with you all. I'm really excited to be speaking at this great event, following the conversation since yesterday and, some of the discussions we've had today. Very happy to have been part of it and gleaning from some of the insight that's been shared so far. I don't think I have so much time, so I'll just dive right into it. Thank you for having me again. I just want to say a big thank you to the organizers of the Africa FinTech Summit. And I'm going to be speaking on a topic that I believe is very timely and relevant, leveraging the RegTechs and the SupTechs to sort of transform the way we regulate innovation, not just FinTech as new entrants into the financial services ecosystem, but financial services innovation, whether it's an incumbent innovating or it's a startup that is innovating, that poses some form of challenge to the regulators, the supervisors. And also, if you take an innovator's perspective, it's really challenging to have to, play in this market that is heavily and rightly so well regulated. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to be sharing some of the insights that I've been fortunate to glean working right across the region, with regulators very closely. So EMTECH will bring regulatory technology and supervisory technology that can enable the much needed transformation within the financial services ecosystem, particularly when you take a regulatory perspective. And definitely, even prior to joining EMTECH, I had the privilege of consulting in my time in KPMG with a number of financial services providers right across the region, including Kenya, the country very close to my heart. So I'm very happy to be here. In terms of agenda, I just try to structure this very quickly along 4 parts. Just talk about, like you expect to learn from any event of this nature, talk about the key trends, what are we seeing when it comes to the regulatory landscape within Africa, taking an Africa perspective. What's the evolution like when it comes to the regulatory landscape? And it's not just an evolution, it's a continuously evolving landscape. Or what does that look like? And I think just being able to bring it home to the transformation that we need to see when it comes to regulation. And that's very important. When you think about the runway, very short runway that the FinTechs typically have when you think about capital and capital backing them, never a patient capital. So you want to see them go to market, you want to see them scale as quickly as possible. Regulation is an enabler if that can be well positioned to support the renovation landscape. So that's something that we believe should be a very insightful topic to talk about. And just closing it up with just a few things that I think we should take home. I like this picture because it tells me much about the landscape within financial services when it comes to how disinteresting it used to be to talk about regulation. I mean, speaking for some time now, a number of events of this nature. And I know whenever we talk about regulation, which is a necessary, seen almost like a necessary evil, is the boring part of the topic, right, or of the event. But it's become a lot more interesting, just as we've seen a lot more interest when it comes to refereeing, something that is very similar in that context in sport, in football. Refereeing has become much more interesting than it used to be, because when the referee does that sign these days, you really want to see what's going to change. Technology backing the referee, video-assisted referee. And, when you think about what's changing, the game has not changed, right? Football is still football. But you see a lot of changes when it comes to, very smart strikers that are able to beat the offside trap. Beat the offside trap, not only their opponent, but even the referees. The referees find it very difficult to be able to say who is this player offside or not. Very difficult to make a call on what's the right goal or not. So you then begin to see that evolution, and that evolution bringing with it some need for technology. So you see that in sports, you see that in a lot of other sectors and industry when it comes to applying technology, and financial services is definitely not an exception. And we've seen technology make a big impact in our sector, in our industry, financial services, right across banking, capital markets, insurance. I mean, just name it. There's a lot of impact that we're seeing. And from an innovator's perspective, this is the picture, right? Very difficult to navigate. You want to be a speedboat, you want to be agile, and that's what's needed, because the customer needs are changing every day. You can't deploy the super tanker approach where it takes you so long to get from point A to point B. So the speedboat, yes, but again, this speedboat is riding on a murky water, the water of regulation. How do you make that work when a speedboat rides on? And it's not because the regulators want to be slow. It's not because they want to be a murky water for the speedboat. It's just because, there are challenges when it comes to, and I think you can encapsulate all of the things you see on this slide when it comes to regulatory challenges, regulating this space. You can encapsulate it in that common saying that technology innovation will always outpace regulation, because regulation has to regulate something that exists. And technology keeps creating new animals every day, new business models, new ways of doing business, new channels, new process automation regime and whatnot. And regulation would then have to figure out, wait a minute, I'm chasing this yesterday, I have this new animal today, how do I regulate that? So a lot of need for knowledge, technological know-how, understanding, we're in the age of data and how that is providing a lot of value for businesses when it comes to, being able to predict, prescribe, leveraging on machine learning and artificial intelligence models. But how do you understand the black box? Because yes, input, output, but in between that, you have a black box. And at times you could really see some algorithmic bias when it comes to the way some of these artificial intelligence and machine learning models process. So, there's just so much when it comes to what to grapple and battle with as a regulator, right? The data is massive. But, just to talk about some of those key trends, and I won't spend too much time, it's not my key message, but one thing we're seeing, which is definitely a good thing for us when it comes to the innovation landscape, is that there's a lot more positivity when it comes to the outlook of FinTechs, innovation. Gone are the days where they were seen as evil, necessary evil, but now definitely being seen as a positive effect bringer, some entities that can bring positivity. When you look right across the Africa region, you see a story of huge financial exclusion, right? Financial inclusion is still a very relevant topic, even though we've made strides, very big strides in a number of countries. The M-Pesa story is very known and well told about Kenya. And, a lot of markets in Africa is also, leveraging the power of mobile money and how that is sort of closing the gap. But financial inclusion is still a big thing. And we're seeing that, and regulators right across the globe, CCAF and World Bank gives us a good, a reference point when it comes to this survey. This was just done post-COVID. Maybe we're saying COVID, but definitely in terms of the impact COVID has had in this sector and the acceleration of what was already a thing, digitization of financial services. We're seeing a lot more regulators say, wait a minute, this is not a bad thing. It's actually pushing financial services innovation. FinTech is definitely creating a lot of opportunities for financial inclusion, market development. Even when it comes to financial stability, you can link that with healthy competition. So if we can actually create a competitive market, enabling these innovators to thrive, maybe we can even have a more stable environment when it comes to financial inclusion and much more. So we're seeing a lot of that. And I think some of the things we're also seeing, just to talk about a few, there are quite a number of observable trends, but we're seeing a lot of regulators innovate. I have this saying that I tend to reference every time, that if you have to regulate innovation, you then have to be prepared to innovate regulation. There's no two ways about it. The way regulators regulated years back, it can't be the same way. Can't be business as usual. The financial services landscape is changing. A lot more. Gone are the days when it took 3 years, 4 years to incubate a product. Thinking through ideation and all of that. Product gets created in a matter of months now. And the agility of product creation, is also pushing the regulators to be a lot more agile, a lot more data-centric, right, about the way they regulate. So we're seeing innovative approaches to regulation. We're seeing regulators right across the region. We're seeing blue patches there. They were observing a lot of trends across a number of countries, including Kenya, Nigeria. I mean, just name it, South Africa, countries that are beginning to put in place things like regulatory sandboxes, right? Innovation offices, regulatory innovation offices, regulatory RegTech labs, and so on and so forth. We're also seeing bespoke regulatory frameworks, right? I think one of the things that we can very quickly understand when it comes to the challenges is the gap, the regulatory gap that we see. The regulatory frameworks that govern financial services are only defined to the extent of financial services. But the picture of financial services has changed. You're seeing a number of new and innovative business models, crowdfunding, right? Gone are the days where only a bank balance sheet can fund lending. You are seeing crowdfund lending. And how does regulators regulate that? Something that was a regulatory gap for a number of jurisdictions, but now being closed. You are seeing a lot of markets, including Nigeria, including Kenya, including countries like South Africa, Egypt, creating fit-for-purpose regulatory frameworks to govern things like P2P lending, ECFs, equity crowdfunding, right? We are seeing open banking frameworks, knowing that can be a big enabler for innovation ecosystem. Regulators leading that stride. Central Bank of Nigeria recently just published the guidelines around open banking in Nigeria, something that should hopefully sort of transform the ecosystem in terms of openness, enabling customers to be the rightful owner of their data, to authorize the sharing of their data across market participants, so that they can get the needed value out of that. So you've seen a lot of also cross-sectoral frameworks, cybersecurity, open banking, as I said, and this is in recognition that, look, technology is proliferating. No longer are we going to have silos, but we need to have a cross-sectorial framework for things like cybersecurity. So you've seen a lot more of these trends come true. So in terms of why I strongly believe that there's a need for change, and hopefully the RegTechs and the SupTechs provide a huge opportunity for that change. When you just take a look at the picture, I won't talk about all of the points here. There are points that I think very easily understandable. But one of the things that I think is very prevalent when it comes to, just looking at the traditional banking and the FinTech, or you could even say traditional finance, not just banking, and the FinTech evolution, the FinTech emergence of FinTech is no longer about chasing top line and bottom line growth. You are seeing a lot of emerging FinTechs. Some of them are becoming unicorns very quickly, but for them, it's about go-to-market. It's about scaling. And how do you enable that to happen as a regulator? Particularly when you have gaps when it comes to how to regulate this space. So you then begin to talk about things like, then begin to talk about the licensing regime, which I'll get to in the next slide. But you're seeing that what is being regulated is actually not a single-sided solution. It's usually platform thinking that is being adopted by most of these fintechs, just staying in the middle and facilitating two sides of the market to come together. How do you regulate that? How do you regulate an heavily mobile-dependent business, right? New risk, cybersecurity is a big thing, and how do you also respond, like I said before, to a structure that is a lot flatter, a lot leaner, and therefore puts a lot of pressure when it comes to the requirement for agility on the regulator side. So that's a big thing. And I think, when you begin to look at some of the, weaknesses that you see just by the nature of startups, you don't have the well-structured GRC framework, governance, risk and controls. And rightly so at times, because some of those processes that are legacy around GRC, you're seeing a lot of technology and innovation around, making them a lot more sleeker, a lot more streamlined. So you have lean ops, no ops. But of course, what that means is that moving from unknowns, from a relatively known space of risk to a lot more unknown space, right? Emerging risk, and a lot of these risks are very difficult to predict, very difficult to curtail. So how do you do that? So you begin to see a lot of, migration, so to speak, from the traditional licensing route to market to more of sandboxing. And what does that mean? What does it mean to sandbox? How do you enable that to happen? How do you allow people to go to market without knowing the risk and the enormity of the risk that you are exposing the consumers to, that you are exposing the financial services sector as a whole to in terms of financial services stability? So data is very key when when you begin to talk about those things. And that's where RegTech and SupTech platform, regulatory technology platforms, supervisory technology platform becomes a big thing, a big opportunity for us, to be able to deal with the unknowns, to be able to learn progressively with the market participant from a regulator's perspective, to be able to co-create, migrating from that, stick approach of the regulators to a more collaborative approach. And we're seeing that even the whole concept of, sandboxing, for example, or, even when you take a broader regulatory perspective beyond sandboxing fintechs, even regulating innovative financial services provider, whether that's a bank or an insurance or whatever, there's a lot more opportunities when it comes to digitization, moving from paper to platforms. And how does that look? I just take an example of regulatory sandboxes, for example, as a reference point. So you sort of seen, an evolution there where a number of regulators right across the globe are moving now from paper-based sort of sandboxing to digital sandboxing. And this is one of the areas where we are very happy to be bringing innovation to the market, enabling regulators to sort of digitize the onboarding of fintechs, right? Digitize the acquisition of data, the processing of data, and almost in a real-time basis, being able to visualize different kind of data points, right? Metrics, go to the market performance metrics, security metrics, system metrics, that enable you as a regulator to, put in fit for purpose regulatory frameworks, having learned how these solutions perform in the market. And I think that is the more, more futuristic way, to regulate this space, leveraging these technologies, leveraging the RegTechs that can streamline regulatory reporting processes, that can streamline compliance processes, that can streamline even the process of enabling that go-to-market for the fintech, streamline even when the process of revoking access when a fintech is not complying, or when definitely from a regulator's perspective, you want to have that kind of capability, particularly when you are sandboxing, right? You have frameworks, you have guidelines. How do you ensure compliance? How do you ensure that you can prescribe, to the participant? And even from a co-creation perspective, how do you enable early engagement between fintechs, between financial services players and the regulators, right? So this is just a picture of how our platform can enable that. Two sides of the platform, RegTech platforms largely used by the market players, also by the regulators, but supervisory technology platforms leveraged by regulators, whether you are a capital market regulator, banking regulator, the central banks. You can co-create, you can commingle with the market players. You can enable the go-to-market. You can enable seamless journeys for the regulators, and hopefully create that much needed financial inclusion enablement, create that much needed growth when it comes to fintech enabling other sectors of the market. And I think that's a huge opportunity when you think about Africa. I just want to bring it home just to talk about some of the key points that I think, as you think about what this looks like and how might we get there. One, I think we have to have an approach that does no harm to innovation. And I think that's very important. It's a very important takeaway. I'm sure a lot of innovators in the room, a number of entrepreneurs in the room would really sort of agree with me that this is an important point, because when it comes to putting the weight of regulation, that regulation can be weighty at times. And putting that weight on a startup at times is not always the best way to go. But how do you have a balanced approach to regulation in a way that you can manage the risk, but also get the returns? And there's certainly returns for the entire ecosystem when it comes to competitiveness, when it comes to stability, as I touched on earlier. But RegTechs and SupTechs, as I alluded to, are going to be very key to creating those fit-for-purpose frameworks. But in terms of the how, just wanted to leave these 6 points, just something to think about. I think it's very important for the FinTech revolution to be embraced. And I don't think I'm saying anything new. The very first slide I showed you on the trend, tells you what the picture is looking like. A lot more adoption, a lot more openness from the regulators to this thing that has become a revolution, FinTech. So, but I think it's very important for us to understand what that landscape looks like. So understanding the landscape, not only regulators understanding that landscape, but even the banks, the incumbent, because it's the name of the game is collaboration. Who can you collaborate with? Who can you engage? And understanding how you can enable their journeys, how they can also enable your journey. Understanding that landscape is very key. And being able to provide the regulatory clarity that is needed, enabled by tech platforms like RegTech and SupTech platform that can bring compliance processes, bring down the cost of compliance, bring down the time to comply, bring down the whole pain around compliance, which can be very painful today. And having a holistic regulatory approach enabled that by the data that you get from such platforms, because those platforms do give you a lot of data. Of course, capacity building is something that we know about how important that is. So my closing thoughts, I know I'm running out of time. My closing thoughts.
Yes. Tunji, sorry, Tunji.
Want to say,
hello, Tunji. All right. Yes, you can give us just the closing remark in the next 1 minute or so. Yes, in the interest of time, we'll appreciate that.
Right. So I'm just closing with this slide, and I think without spending too much time on it, I think it's very important that we make we take the next steps. Right, we talk about overhauling regulatory frameworks, enabling that with RegTech and FinTech platform, innovating front to back, and how that's important for all the ecosystem players. Collaboration, I touched on it, but I think it's important to take what is the next step. We don't need to wait until we can make that giant stride forward. I'm of the school of thought that done is better than perfect in many situations. Right, so can we take that next step when it comes to leveraging some of this technology? A number of them are cloud-based. A number of them are, SaaS platforms. From a fintech perspective, from a bank perspective, from a regulator perspective, you really don't have to have a huge outlay of cash. There are SaaS platforms out there that can enable some of these journeys. And I do hope that you've been able to pick one or two things that would help your regulatory journeys. And also from a regulator's perspective, help regulating and supervising the market a lot better with technology. Thank you so much.